The notification came in at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, and I almost didn't see it. My phone was charging on the nightstand, screened down, the way I'd started keeping it after my therapist told me that late-night scrolling was destroying my sleep. But something made me flip it over. Some quiet instinct I can't explain. The way you sometimes reach for a glass of water before you even realize you're thirsty. And there it was. A direct message from an account I didn't recognize. A username that was just a string of letters and numbers, the kind people make when they want to be anonymous, but haven't quite thought it through. The preview text was cut off, but I could read enough. Your husband looks so good in these. Thought you should know what you've been missing. I sat up in bed. The bedroom was dark except for the blue glow of the phone, and Michael was asleep next to me, one arm thrown over his face the way he always slept when he'd had more than 2 glasses of wine at dinner. His breathing was slow and even. The house was completely quiet. Outside, our neighborhood was the kind of still that only happens after midnight in the suburbs, when even the dogs have given up barking and the last car has pulled into the last driveway. We lived in a 4-bedroom colonial in Westfield, New Jersey, and on nights like that, the silence felt like something you could hold in your hands. I used to love that silence. I used to think it meant we were safe. I opened the message. And I want you to understand something before I tell you what I saw. I was not a suspicious wife. I was not the kind of woman who checked her husband's phone or drove past his office at lunchtime or quizzed him about every work event. I had never had a reason to be. In 11 years of marriage, Michael Carter had never given me a single moment of real doubt. He was steady. He was boring in the best possible way. He came home for dinner 5 nights out of 7. He coached our son's Little League team on Saturdays. He called his mother every Sunday morning without fail. I had built my entire sense of security around the fact that Michael was simply not the type. So, when I opened that message and saw the first photo, the ground didn't just shift under my feet, it disappeared entirely. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because the story of what happened that night and what I did the next morning only makes sense if you understand the life I thought I had. And that life up until about 8 weeks before that Tuesday had been genuinely, quietly, beautifully good. Michael and I met in Chicago in 2012 at a networking happy hour that neither of us actually wanted to attend. I was 3 years out of Northwestern with a marketing degree, grinding away at a mid-sized PR firm and thinking seriously about getting my MBA. He was in corporate finance, working insane hours at a consulting firm downtown, wearing a suit that fit slightly too well for someone who claimed he'd just come from a regular Tuesday. We ended up standing next to the same terrible charcuterie board, making the same joke about how the cheese was sweating more than the attendees, and talking for 2 hours straight without either of us remembering to look at our phones. I drove home that night thinking, well, that's either going to be nothing or everything. It was everything. We dated for 2 years, got engaged at a rooftop restaurant in the West Loop with a ring that Michael had spent 4 months picking out. I know because his sister Jennifer told me later, laughing, that he'd dragged her to 6 different jewelry stores and driven her absolutely insane. We got married in September 2015, 140 guests, my mom crying before the ceremony even started, Michael's dad giving a toast that made the whole room laugh and then immediately tear up. We moved to New Jersey 2 years later, when Michael was recruited for a VP role at Harrow Solutions, a mid-sized tech company headquartered in Parsippany. The money was good. The benefits were excellent. The house in Westfield was more space than we needed, but we figured we'd grow into it, and we did. Our son Tyler was born in 2018, and suddenly 4 bedrooms didn't seem like so much after all. By the time this story begins, Michael wasn't VP of anything anymore. He was the CEO. He'd been promoted 18 months earlier after the previous CEO retired, and the board had unanimously chosen him as the replacement. I remembered the night he called me from the office parking lot, voice shaking slightly, saying, "Ashley, they offered me the job.
the actual job. I'd started crying right there in the kitchen, Tyler on my hip, spatula in my other hand. Completely ridiculous. We went out to dinner that Friday to celebrate, just the two of us, a place in Summit that required reservations 3 weeks in advance. And I looked across the table at this man I'd built a life with and felt something so clean and whole that I almost couldn't name it. Pride, maybe. Certainty. The feeling that we had made it somewhere real. His schedule changed after the promotion. Obviously, CEOs don't keep regular hours, and Michael took the responsibility seriously in a way I genuinely respected. There were board meetings, investor calls, quarterly reviews, team offsites. There were dinners with clients that ran late. There were Saturday mornings when he had to be on a call with the Singapore office before Tyler and I were even awake. I adjusted. We adjusted. That's what marriage is, right? You recalibrate constantly, and as long as the core of it stays solid, the schedule stuff is just logistics. The core felt solid. It felt rock solid right up until it didn't. I want to describe the house to you because I think the house matters. We had updated the kitchen 2 summers ago. Quartz countertops, a farmhouse sink, those open shelves that I had been genuinely excited about, and then spent 18 months regretting because dusting them is a nightmare.
The backyard had a patio that Michael had spent an entire weekend in May laying pavers for, coming inside sunburned and satisfied, tracking dirt across my clean floors. And I had not even been annoyed about it because watching him do something physical and real like that made me love him in a very specific, uncomplicated way. Tyler's room had glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling that we'd put up when he was 4, arranged into actual constellations because Michael had insisted on doing it properly, lying on Tyler's floor with a star map from the internet, taking it completely seriously. I used to stand in the doorway of that room sometimes when Tyler was asleep and think that this was the most important thing I had ever been part of building. That was the life. That was what I was protecting without knowing I needed to protect it. The first sign that something was wrong came about 8 weeks before the Tuesday night with the phone. And looking back, I can see it clearly for what it was. But at the time, I told myself a story about it that made it manageable because the alternative was something I couldn't afford to look at directly. It was a Sunday evening in late September. Tyler was at a sleepover at his friend Brandon's house, which meant Michael and I had the rare luxury of a quiet night to ourselves. I'd made pasta, nothing fancy, just a simple cacio e pepe that I'd been making for years, and opened a bottle of wine, and I was feeling genuinely good about the evening, hopeful even. We hadn't had real alone time in weeks, and I had been missing him in that low-grade, persistent way. You miss someone who lives in the same house as you, but keeps different hours. Michael came home at 7:30, which was when he'd said he'd be home, and I noticed immediately that something was off. Not dramatically off. He wasn't pale or shaking or anything like that. He was just slightly too composed. There's a specific kind of stillness that people have when they're managing something internally, when they're keeping a lid on something, and I had lived with Michael long enough to know his version of it. He kissed me on the cheek, said the pasta smelled amazing, poured himself a glass of wine, and sat down at the kitchen island. And all of it was completely normal, except for the slight tension around his eyes that he didn't quite manage to hide. "Long day?" I asked. "Always," he said, and smiled. We ate dinner and talked about Tyler's soccer game, about a renovation project our neighbor Karen was doing that had apparently produced some kind of HOA dispute, about a documentary Michael wanted to watch. It was a perfectly fine dinner. And then he excused himself to take a work call. "Singapore, I'm sorry. I have to grab this," and disappeared into his home office for 45 minutes. When he came back, he was looser, more relaxed. And I remember thinking that whatever the tension had been, the call had resolved it somehow. I remember thinking that was a good sign. I did not yet understand what kind of call could make a man relax like that. 2 weeks later, I found a receipt. It was not hidden. It was just sitting in the pocket of his dry cleaning, which I was sorting through before dropping it off. A dinner receipt from a restaurant in Hoboken. October 8th, a Wednesday. The total was $340 for 2 people. I stared at it for a long moment, standing in our bedroom with a pile of his dress shirts over my arm. Michael had told me he was in Newark that Wednesday for a vendor meeting that ran late. He texted me at 7 to say he was grabbing something quick near the office. I had texted back a thumbs up and told him Tyler had aced his spelling test. The restaurant in Hoboken was 20 minutes from Newark in the wrong direction. $340 for 2 people was not something quick. I put the receipt in my dresser drawer. I told myself there was probably an explanation. I told myself I wasn't the kind of person who made accusations based on a receipt. I told myself I trusted my husband. But that night, for the first time in 11 years of marriage, I lay in bed next to Michael and listened to him breathe and felt something cold and unfamiliar settle in my chest, like a stone dropped into still water, sending out rings that I couldn't stop, no matter how much I wanted the surface to go calm again. I didn't sleep well. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself that every morning for the next 6 weeks, right up until the moment a stranger's message lit up my phone in the dark and made it impossible to tell myself anything at all. The photos were not ambiguous. I want to be clear about that, because sometimes when people tell stories like this, there's a version where you could almost explain it away, where you could squint at the evidence and see something innocent if you really wanted to. These photos did not allow for squinting. There were 7 of them. A restaurant I didn't recognize, candle-lit, the kind of place with cloth napkins and a wine list. Michael in his gray suit, the one he'd worn to the board dinner in October. And a woman, blonde, mid-30s, laughing at something he'd said, her hand on his forearm across the table, the way you only touch someone when touching them is already a habit. The messages were worse than the photos. Not graphic, not in the way you might expect, but intimate in a way that was somehow more devastating. Inside jokes, references to things I had never heard of. A hotel in Hoboken that I now understood was not 20 minutes from the vendor meeting in Newark, but directly across the street from the restaurant where $340 had bought someone else an evening with my husband. There were dozens of messages, maybe 100. The woman's name, as she had introduced herself in the very first message she sent me, was Danielle. No last name, just Danielle. And then a little winking emoji.
And then, I figured you deserve to see what your husband has been up to. He talks about you sometimes, not very kindly. That last sentence, that was the one that did it. Not the photos, not the hotel receipts she'd helpfully screenshotted, not even the messages where Michael called her. The only real thing in his week. It was that sentence. He talks about you sometimes, not very kindly. I sat in that dark bedroom for a long time. Michael slept beside me. His breathing didn't change. The house was still, and I made a decision so quietly and so completely that I surprised myself with how calm I felt. There was no crying, no shaking, no waking him up to scream. I just sat there in the blue glow of my phone, and I thought, he walked into the office today as the CEO of Harrove Solutions. He shook hands and led meetings and made decisions that affected hundreds of people. He came home to a dinner I cooked and a son I had put to bed and a wife who had no idea. He had done all of that in a suit I had dry cleaned, in a house I had built with him, and he had done it without a single tremor of guilt that I could see. So I decided he would not walk into that office the same way tomorrow. Hardgrove Solutions had a company-wide group chat. Every employee from the board members to the IT department was in it. It was used for announcements, event reminders, the occasional birthday shout-out.
Michael had added me to it 2 years ago, when they'd started including spouses in certain company communications. I had never posted in it. I had mostly forgotten I was in it. I opened it. I copied every single photo and screenshot that Danielle had sent me. All of it. The restaurant, the hotel, the messages where Michael referred to me by name in terms that made my stomach turn. And I pasted them into the group chat with one line of text. Just one. Hi, everyone. I thought the company should know what your CEO has been doing on work nights. Have a great Wednesday. I hit send.
I watched the little check marks appear. Then I put my phone face down on the nightstand, plugged it back into the charger, and I went to sleep. I genuinely went to sleep. I don't know how to explain that, except to say that I had been lying awake for 6 weeks, carrying something I didn't have a name for. And the moment I put it down, I was simply exhausted. I slept for 7 hours without dreaming. My alarm went off at 6:30, which is when I always got up to start Tyler's morning routine. I got up, made coffee, made his lunch, turkey and cheese on whole wheat, apple slices, the little bag of pretzels he liked, and put him on the bus at 7:40. The whole time, Michael was still upstairs. He didn't come down. I didn't go up. When I finally turned my phone back on, it had 94 notifications. I sat at the kitchen island with my coffee, and I went through them methodically. There were messages from numbers I didn't recognize, probably people from Harrow I'd never met. There were 4 missed calls from Jennifer, Michael's sister. There were 2 voicemails from a number I recognized as belonging to Linda Marsh, who was the head of HR at Harrow Solutions, and had come to our house for Thanksgiving dinner exactly once, 3 years ago, when Michael had felt obligated to include her because she'd just gone through a divorce. There was a text from my own sister Rachel that said, "Only Ashley, call me right now." And there were at the bottom of the notification list 47 messages from Michael sent between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m., escalating in a way that I read with the same detached calm I'd felt the night before. The first ones were confusion. "Ashley, what is this? Ashley, answer your phone. Ashley, please, I can explain. Just wake up." The middle ones shifted into something uglier. Not threats exactly, but pressure. "You need to delete that. Do you understand what you've done? Do you understand what this means for us?" And the last few, sent around 5:30 in the morning, had a different quality entirely. Quieter, more desperate. "Ashley, I'm scared. Please just talk to me." I put the phone face down again. I finished my coffee, and then I called the number I had saved in my phone under the name Margaret Holloway Family Law, because I had added it to my contacts 3 weeks earlier on a Thursday afternoon when Michael was at a board meeting and Tyler was at school, and I had sat in my car in the parking lot of a Whole Foods in Summit and looked up divorce attorneys for 45 minutes and then saved one number before I could talk myself out of it. I had not called it yet. I called it now. Margaret's assistant put me through in less than 2 minutes, which told me either that Margaret ran a very efficient office or that she had already heard my name somewhere this morning. I suspected the latter. "Ashley Carter," Margaret said, not as a question. Her voice was warm and completely unsurprised. "I've been expecting you might reach out. What can I do for you?" "I need to file for divorce," I said, "and I need to know how to protect myself and my son." "Then you've called the right person," she said. "Can you come in this afternoon?" I was in Margaret's office in Chatham by 2:00. She was 60, silver-haired, with the kind of calm authority that only comes from having seen every possible version of this situation. She had 3 diplomas on the wall and a box of tissues on the corner of her desk that had clearly been placed there intentionally. She did not make me feel stupid for not having called sooner. She made me feel for the first time since Tuesday night like I was standing on solid ground. We talked for 2 hours. I showed her everything. The screenshots Danielle had sent,
The receipt from Hoboken, a credit card statement I had pulled that morning showing 4 other dinners at restaurants I didn't recognize, hotel charges totaling nearly $3,000 over 8 weeks.
Margaret made notes without visible reaction, paused occasionally to ask a clarifying question, and at the end, she folded her hands on her desk and looked at me steadily. "New Jersey is an equitable distribution state," she said. "Given the length of your marriage, your contribution to the household, and the fact that Michael's career advancement was supported in significant part by your domestic management, you are in a strong position. The documentation you have is valuable but not legally required. New Jersey is a no-fault state. What matters for the financial settlement is the marital assets." She paused. "Do you know roughly what those are?" I did know. I had always been the one who managed the household finances, paid the bills, handled the 401k contributions. Michael earned the money, but I knew exactly where it lived. I told her the house in Westfield, which we'd bought for $78,000, and which was now worth somewhere around $1.1 million, based on recent comps in the neighborhood. Michael's 401k, which was just over $42,000, a joint savings account with $68,000, a brokerage account in his name only, with another $95,000 that he had opened after the CEO promotion, without mentioning it to me until I found the statement by accident. Margaret wrote all of it down. "Good," she said simply. "Let's get started." Michael called me 11 times that afternoon while I was in Margaret's office. I let every call go to voicemail. When I got home, he was sitting at the kitchen island, the same spot where I'd had my coffee that morning, and he looked like he had aged 5 years overnight. His eyes were red. He was still in yesterday's clothes. He had clearly not gone into the office. "Ashley," he said when I walked in. His voice cracked on my name. I set my purse on the counter. I looked at him for a long moment. This man I had driven home thinking about on a Tuesday night in 2012. This man who had spent 4 months picking out a ring and laying on our son's floor, arranging stars into real constellations, and come inside sunburned from laying pavers and called his mother every Sunday. I looked at him, and I felt grief and fury and something else underneath both of those things, something that felt almost like pity, which surprised me. "I talked to a divorce attorney today," I said. "Her name is Margaret Holloway. You'll be hearing from her office." He put his face in his hands. His shoulders shook. "I ended it," he said muffled. "I ended it 2 weeks ago. I swear to you, Ashley, it was over. I was going to tell you." "You were going to tell me what?" I asked. My voice was very even. "That for the last 8 weeks you'd been having dinner with someone in Hoboken and charging hotels to a credit card and talking about me. Your wife, the mother of your son, not very kindly. Were you going to tell me that?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. "The company chat," he finally said. "Ashley, the board there's going to be a meeting tomorrow. They might ask me to step down. 11 years of I know." I said, "I know exactly what I sent and to whom." He looked up, and I want to be honest with you about what I saw in his face in that moment, because it wasn't just guilt. There was something else there, a flash of something that looked almost like disbelief, like he had genuinely not calculated that I was capable of it, like in the whole architecture of whatever he'd been doing, whatever story he'd been telling himself, he had placed me somewhere small and manageable and unaware, and the realization that I was none of those things was landing on him now in his own kitchen with the full weight of its consequences. "You should call Jennifer," I said. "She's been trying to reach you, and you should find somewhere to stay tonight. I'll have Tyler scheduled to you by the end of the week." I walked upstairs. I heard him sit there in silence for a long time. Then I heard him pick up his phone. The board meeting happened on Thursday morning. I know what happened there because Linda Marsh called me.
Not in her capacity as HR director, but apparently as a human being who had had wine at my Thanksgiving table and felt some obligation to close the loop. She told me that the board had not asked Michael to resign, not immediately, but that they had placed him on a 60-day administrative leave pending a formal review of his conduct, specifically because several of the messages I had posted included references to business dinners and client entertainment that had been expensed to the company. The financial compliance piece, Linda said carefully, was a separate matter from the personal one. I thanked her and hung up. Danielle, for her part, went completely silent after that Tuesday night. Whatever she had imagined would happen when she sent me those photos, a confrontation, a collapse, some satisfying drama where she got to watch the wife fall apart, she had not imagined this. I looked at her profile later that week. It was set to private. I felt nothing toward her except a kind of tired clarity. She was not the reason my marriage was over. She was just the messenger I hadn't asked for. The divorce took 9 months. Margaret was exactly as good as her calm, silver-haired authority had promised. I got the house. I got half of the brokerage account. I got an equitable share of the 401k. Michael's attorney pushed back on the brokerage account, arguing it was his separate property since he'd opened it after the promotion. But Margaret pointed out that the funds used to seed it had come from our joint account, and that was the end of that argument. The final settlement was more than fair. It was, in fact, exactly what a woman who had spent 11 years managing a household, raising a child, and quietly holding everything together while her husband built a career deserved. Michael did not resign from Harrove. The board's review concluded 2 months into his leave, and he returned to the CEO role with what the company press release called renewed commitment to professional standards, which was the most corporate sentence I had ever read. I heard from Jennifer, who remained relentlessly kind to me throughout the entire process, that it had cost him a significant portion of his annual bonus, and 2 board members who had simply had enough. He was still the CEO. He was just a diminished one, and he knew it. And everyone who had been in that group chat knew it too. Tyler was 7 when his father and I separated. He is 9 now. He knows that his parents don't live together anymore, and he knows that both of us love him completely, and for now, that is enough. I told him that sometimes grown-ups change, and that families can look different and still be good. He thought about it for a moment, and then asked if he could still have glow-in-the-dark stars at my house too. I said yes. We put them up on a Saturday afternoon, just the 2 of us, and I let him arrange them however he wanted. He did not use a star map. He just stuck them up in patterns that made sense to him. I stood in his doorway that night after he fell asleep and looked at his ceiling at those random, imperfect constellations, and I thought, this is still the most important thing I have ever been part of building. Just the shape of it changed. I live in the house in Westfield. I kept it not out of stubbornness, but because it is Tyler's home and Tyler's school district and Tyler's little league field, and because I had laid the groundwork for that life just as much as Michael had, and I was not going to be the one who left it. The quartz countertops are still there, the farmhouse sink, the open shelves that I have finally, after 2 years, stopped feeling guilty about dusting, the backyard patio that Michael laid in a weekend in May. I sit out there sometimes in the evenings when Tyler is at Michael's with a glass of wine and nothing to do, and I do not hate those pavers. I just see them for what they are. Stones in a yard, useful, solid, entirely impersonal. My therapist told me last spring that what I did that night, the calmness, the deliberateness, the going to sleep, was not coldness. She said it was clarity. She said, some people spend years trying to find that kind of clarity and never do. I told her I didn't feel particularly wise about it. I just felt tired of being someone who told herself comfortable stories. She said that was the same thing. I don't know what Danielle thought was going to happen when she sent those photos. Maybe she wanted chaos. Maybe she wanted me to break. Maybe she just wanted to matter to someone, which is a very human thing to want, even when you go about it in a way that is genuinely terrible. What she got instead was a woman who had been carrying a stone in her chest for 6 weeks, and finally, at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, put it down. What she got was a single message in a company group chat and a phone plugged in face down on a nightstand. What she got was someone who had already decided somewhere quiet and deep that the truth was less dangerous than the lie. And the next morning, when they walked into that office and saw what was waiting for them on their screens, I was already on my second cup of coffee. Tyler's lunch was packed, and the bus had just pulled away from the curb. The neighborhood was quiet the way it gets after 7 in the morning when everyone has somewhere to be. I stood on my front porch for a moment in the October air, and I thought, I built something real here, and I'm still standing in it. If you found this story powerful, please hit the like button and share it with your loved ones.